rely more on motivation or habit?
That is a great question. I think they're both important for having known periods of lack of motivation that can really be handicapping sometimes. But in general, that's not a problem I face a lot. I am a creature of habit for sure, and I try to have sort of regimented schedules for certain things. I also try to keep my life to be a bit open and flowing at the same time, so not everything is like on the clock. But I do think that motivation definitely is something that you'll learn to get better at. And, as you go through life, you find ways to motivate yourself and to remind yourself that, like, hey, even if today wasn't the greatest, or even if I'm struggling with this, whatever I'm doing right now, I know that that's temporary and I can get past that. And so I do a lot of self-motivation. I think that's probably, out of the two, the most important thing. Habit is just kind of like more something I would say I kind of fight against, because I don't want to get stuck in something just because it's a habit.
Yeah. I've been trying to make some healthy habits kind of happen this year. It seems to be going well so far. I've been trying to keep I keep like a log every day. Whether I'll get bored of that at some point, I don't know. So I'm kind of doing like what you say, where it's like almost trying to kick. It's more, I could almost look at it the other way. I could almost look at it as if I'm trying to kick like the bad habits. Depends which way you look at it. But
right.
Do you find what motivates you more? The kind of the positive stuff, the kind of the sort of the carrot and stick approach. What do you find sort of motivates you more? The kind of the happy kind of rewarding things that you get from working hard, or do you actually find you also get motivated by the harder times in life that maybe just give you that kick that you need to sort of step up your game, I guess?
Yeah, I think they're both important at times. I'm kind of, what I've noticed with me with motivation is I'm somebody who likes to complete stuff. So I get a very rewarding feeling when, for example, I've completed a drum recording or anything, a tour, or an album is finished, whatever, something like that. That's very rewarding for me. So when I have a task or a gig or a job, whatever, and I really commit to it, at that point it's like, okay, I'm going to be focused on this until it's done the best I can. So that's something that really drives me and always has in life. I like to finish stuff. I'm not somebody who likes to leave projects hanging and then move on to something else. I struggle a little bit with multitasking sometimes, I think because of that reason in part. So, but when it comes to positive and negative, those are the way I'm viewing that these days, is that they're so inextricably intertwined in life that you can't really separate them, and you can't really, put too much importance on one or the other. You kind of have to go with the flow, and you can often turn negatives into positives, I find. For example, some of the environmental stuff I do these days really comes from kind of a negative place, if you will, because there's a lot of destruction of, nature and animals and habitat happening and all that. So it's kind of a negative thing, but I try to turn that into a positive by being like, okay, let's work on this. Let's make people aware and let's show them what we can do if we actually work together on this and create awareness and start projects to counter these things happening and to stop them and to educate people so that they can take care of the land and all the inhabitants of the planet a little bit better. And you can do that obviously in a multitude of ways. I've chosen a few. Savage Lands, which is a reforesting project that I do together with a friend in Costa Rica. I'm also an ambassador for Shark Water, who does a lot of work in the oceanic field protecting sharks and just raising awareness about them. And so it's things like that where a negative kind of becomes a positive. Of course, the work is ongoing, and there's always going to be a dark side to those things. That's kind of how I view life.
With going on to the Savage Lands sort of project, regarding that, this is a similar question I asked. I spoke to Ben from Blackstone Cherry not so long ago, and he has his own sort of charitable foundation, and he, the question I had for him that I'm intrigued to ask you as well is, there's always obviously the option when it comes to things like sort of charitable sort of work. There's always the option to just kind of take your money and just give it to a charity. You know, you could just kind of, which is great. You know, you're kind of helping whatever cause you're giving it to. What is it that has made you want to be more personally involved with that kind of work?
Well, probably first of all, I don't have that kind of money, so I can't just be like, here's $1 million and, you know, go ahead, do it.
Like Leonardo DiCaprio or someone.
Yeah. So, you know, obviously charities do need money. It's, you know, in this world, you can't do anything, you can't achieve anything of any importance really without that, especially if you're trying to tackle some of these bigger projects. So, you know, if somebody goes like, hey, I don't have time to do much, but I can give you a bunch of money so you can go ahead. Sure, please, you know, that's fantastic. For me, like, I'm not in that position. I'm more in a position where I have, you know, have a little bit of a platform. I have some people who follow me, and in the metal scene in general, there's a lot of, I think, people are sensitive to these issues. You know, there's kind of a common thread. Obviously, you got bands like Gojira who speak a lot about environmentalism, and that's kind of their whole theme. But I think even in a more wider approach, you know, there's also older bands like Sepultura who have done that a lot, and I'm sure there's a bunch more. And there's just a general sensibility on those things. So I try to use the platform I have to tell people, hey, look, you know, we often feel powerless when we see these issues. The truth is we can't do something. We just have to do it. We just have to get together and do something. And some people might not be able to give much or anything at all. They might just be able to be like, hey, I don't have any money to give to your charity, but I can spread the word to my friends. Or I know this guy who has money who might be interested, so I'm going to tell him like, hey, like, have you heard about this organization? That's the kind of grassroots kind of, you know, approach that I'm interested in, because I believe that ultimately, if we want to make a change to this planet, and if we want to make sure that, you know, there's a future for the next generations and kind of avert some of this extinction that's happening and all this destruction, it's only going to happen if a lot of us are aware and just choose to be a part of that. Again, in ways big or small, you know, not everybody can be massively involved. Some people may not really be able to be involved at all, and that's fine too. We don't all have to do the same thing, but I just want to really raise awareness and also really show people that, like, you can do something yourself. It was a beautiful thing. I've told this story before, but after we started Savage Lands, somebody reached out to us and said, hey, I'm going to buy this little parcel of land that's behind where I live and reforest it because I'm inspired by what you guys do. And that's exactly what I mean. You know, it's everybody can do something, and I want people to think about what can I do.
I recently read The Tipping Point, and he talks about how certain people in life are these kind of, I'm so going to misquote this now, I'm going to get this wrong, but he talks about how there's certain people in life that are sort of connectors, that they sort of they can make social epidemics kind of tip by being essentially not just by knowing lots of people, but sort of creating a sense of trust. And I guess that's something that you maybe get through having a platform, is people get to know who you are, and then they sort of build this relationship with you that maybe, I guess through things like social media, they could never have maybe had that you know, years and years ago. So now they can actually build this relationship where they sort of know you maybe better than you want them to at times, but and then of course you can use that to sort of leverage and kind of inspire some sort of change, which I think is really cool. No, that's what was it that kind of drew you initially to that kind of that sort of love for, like, what's the word, kind of helping sort of or facing environmental challenges? What kind of was the first thing that made you sort of want to do some positive work there?
Well, I've always been drawn to nature, even though I'm totally a city person, and I've always lived in cities and enjoyed, you know, the practicality of living in cities and the vibe and the hustle and bustle. I've always loved that. So I'm not really somebody who's ever really live in nature, but I always love nature when I do go there. And I love watching nature documentaries, and I love animals. Ever since I was a little kid, my parents always had cats, and, I was very quickly drawn to like seeing animals at the zoo or meeting dogs. And just, one day, I remember my dad actually told me the story not too long ago. Like, remember that one time when you came home, you went biking by yourself? I was probably like 8 or 9, biking down the street in Belgium. And I came home, I found like a dead bird, and I'm like, Dad, look, the bird is dead. What can we do? It was like the bird had been dead for like 4 days.
Oh, no.
And so it was like, there was always this care, right? And so when I met my wife, Hannah, who was being a vegetarian since she was pretty young, way before it was a thing. She started basically, she became a vegetarian like in the 80s, when there was really not many options available food-wise and stuff. I met her, and she really kind of made me actually live up to what I felt, because until then I hadn't really put much thought into how I ate and what actually happens in factory farms, or just in general how the planet is treated by humanity, which often in cases is not so good. And she really kind of started opening my eyes to that just through conversations. And she'd show me a book or a documentary, or we'd just talk about stuff. And so eventually I found myself like, oh, it's been 2 months since I ate meat, so I guess I'm vegetarian now. And then I moved on many years later to being a vegan, to making that conscious decision, like, okay, I don't want to eat animal products. And so throughout all those years, this is like 15, 16 years ago that I really started kind of looking more into what's going on. And now you can find all that information very easily, again, through the internet. It's easy to do research. You get to know some different organizations. I did a few things with PETA, which is obviously one of the famous ones, but there are a lot of actions happening, and a lot of people fighting on different fronts. Obviously we've probably all heard of Sea Shepherd as well, but there's so many good ones, and I started like getting interested in some local ones. There's one locally here in LA near us called Animal Hope and Wellness, who rescue a lot of dogs from the Chinese and Korean meat trade. And, I think that's something we can all relate to. People, a lot of us have dogs and cats, so it's hard for us to imagine why would dogs get slaughtered, But it's really, different for other animals. When you start thinking about it, like, it's just because we've domesticated dogs and cats over the years, but we haven't domesticated pigs and cows in the same way. Obviously, it's a bit less practical to have, a 300-pound pig, or I don't know how much a cow weighs, in your house. So they're a little bit less domesticatable in cats and dogs, but essentially they are the same thing. We've just been conditioned to view them as food, And so I was like, you know what? I was totally conditioned like that for 30 years of my life. I thought, meal without meat wasn't a meal, literally like every meal I had to have meat in it. And now I'm vegan. So I'm probably feel better and healthier than I've ever been. So a lot of it is about just doing what you feel is right. I don't preach about veganism to people. I just tell them my story. And then if people are inspired by that, then that's cool. But yeah, that was kind of the whole starting point, I think, is really my love for animals. That's just always been there, and just kind of following through on it, coming to a point in my life where I was like, well, if I really love animals, am I living the way I should be living according to my own principles and my own ideas? And the answer was no. I need to make some changes, and that keeps evolving. It's gradually over time. And I don't judge anybody for doing what they do. I just tell my story if people want to hear it. Like in this case, we're talking about it, and then people make up their own mind. I don't want to be told what to do or what to eat, and I wouldn't tell someone else the same thing.
It's an interesting point you make about kind of how you hadn't sort of balanced how you were feeling about, animals, environment, etc., with how you were acting. And I think oftentimes, especially in the modern day, there is this balance between, or sort of an imbalance in a lot of people, I think in a lot of young people, where they haven't, where they want to be or who they want to be in life often isn't who they are at the moment. I know there's loads of things I don't do every day, and I'm trying to do them more now. I talked about these habits and stuff. It's New Year's resolutions is a bit cheesy, but like I actually started them 4 days early, so I don't count it. But have there been any things in life where you've kind of, maybe any moments in life where you felt like, this is who I am, this is who I want to be, but it's not quite, I haven't quite found that thing about me that I guess it sounds cheesy, but makes me special, if you know what I mean. Have you had any moments in life kind of like that?
I mean, yeah, well, one big one was kind of the one I mentioned earlier, when my wife kind of explained to me how she became vegetarian and why she was vegetarian and all that stuff, and how when she started, nobody understood. Her parents thought it would pass in 3 days, and all the people around her, a lot of people around her were like, "You're crazy," and she had a lot of times just had to eat like, lettuce because there wasn't much else available, whatever. There weren't like many veggie burgers, now we have all these awesome options. Like then there was pretty much nothing, but it really came from music for her, like through bands like Minor Threat and that whole scene, that was very vocal, whole straight edge scene. And, she told me how she used to make this zine, a fanzine, where she would do these collages of things to just try and tell people, like, look what's going on. Because truthfully, what I'd like to say about what you said is it's true. There's this dichotomy that happens oftentimes. And I think part of that is growing. You always grow as a person through life. That's why they say old and wise, right? Because you learn more and more. It doesn't stop at a certain age. If you're open-minded, if you keep your mind open, you'll keep growing. But this dichotomy is also something that, in the case of the meat industry, for example, or the dairy industry, they feed into that. They feed into the fact that, like, look, here's their nicely packaged like chicken breast or steak, or like, oh, milk is really good for you because it has calcium. It gives you, it fights osteoporosis. Like, basically all this stuff that's basically bullshit. It's not really proven scientifically, just like how they sold us on like that fat is bad, but sugar is good. And like all these industries, there's so much money involved that, a lot of times this dichotomy is there from the moment we're born and we're raised, and people don't know better because there's a lot of misinformation, just like what we're seeing, all the stuff we're learning, how these oil companies have known since the 70s or 60s that climate change was a risk. And that there are a lot of things they're doing that are going to be bad ultimately, but they had all that science because they studied it, but they purposely kept it under wraps and said the opposite in public because they want to continue expanding their industries because of the billions of dollars that are involved. So it's like, once you start realizing that these dichotomies exist, then it's a time where you ask yourself, like, how can I look myself in the mirror, and tell myself, not even anybody else, but tell myself, like, yeah, I'm an animal person, but yeah, I'm a part of this stuff that happens. Like, it doesn't make sense, so at some point for me it was a pretty easy decision, I have to say. It kind of happened, like I said, naturally, where it's like my wife didn't, when I first moved in with her, she didn't bring meat into the house. I mean, she'd been vegetarian for many years at that point, and so I just ate with her whatever was there. And when we'd go out to eat sometimes, I'd be like, what are you getting? Like, okay, I'll try that. Learning new things like vegetarian, vegan options, whatever. And so after a while, I was just like, well, I guess I'm vegetarian because I'm fine. I haven't needed to eat meat for quite a while now. So it's not even like I'm going to do it. It was more like, oh, I guess it happened, and apparently it works. So it's a very slow, it was a slow process. It took me some time to kind of minimize the dichotomy, and it took me another 10 years to be like, okay, now I want to be vegan because dairy is also like not, good. Again, I'm talking mostly about, just to clarify, about, the big industries. Like, I know there are local producers and people will say that a lot, what about, oh, I buy my stuff locally from a local farm and stuff. That's a whole different story, but that makes up a very small percentage of where people get their, meat and dairy from. That's the truth. Or fish, most of it is like massive production and animals treated like commodities, not like the living sentient beings they are. And that's what I have an issue with, the little boy that brought the dead bird home. Or I remember, like, when I was even younger, once I was messing around and like killed a fly, and I was like probably accidentally hit it or something, and I started bawling. I was probably like 4 years old at the time. So I always just had this connection with, like, I like life, I like animals to be able to live the way they're intended to live, and I don't want to interfere with that. We do enough of it already, just being humans.
I remember when I was a kid, I had like a foam. I sound like such a psychopath with this, but I had like a foam little baseball bat, and I used to try and squash the ants with it. But then one day I got bitten by one on my hand, and I ran inside crying. And I think I kind of learnt my lesson. So obviously, I don't know if that's some sort of thing that, like, if I'm a psychopath deep down or whatever, maybe, I don't know. I'm sure. I remember there was I can't remember. There was a you know, those sort of like party trick kind of tests, like, are you a psychopath? I saw one.
Right.
Someone asked one like as a joke in a group between me and some friends, and I remember, I can't remember what it was now. I can't remember what the test was. This is really annoying. But either way, there was about like 6 or 7 of us, and they asked a question. I thought, oh, it's obviously, you know, this, whatever the answer was.
Right.
And all my friends said the opposite thing. I was like, oh shit. I think I'm a psychopath. Yeah, I'll have to find it for you. It was so funny. I just remember, because I remember someone asked me, I was like, this test bullshit, this isn't anything. And then all my friends said the opposite. And then I said my answer and they all looked at me like, what? So there might be something wrong with me. I don't know. You were saying earlier about how putting your, sort of using your platform to spread a sort of message, I guess. And you talked about how, you know, the metal community is quite receptive to maybe more like progressive ideas, I guess. What do you think it is about people? And I agree with you. I feel like a lot of metalheads tend to pick up on these kind of things maybe more. It's hard to say really. Maybe they're just more vocal about it. But what do you think it is maybe about the sort of personality type that you see in the metal community that is perhaps more receptive to some of these ideas?
Maybe it's just we're all kind of outcasts in some way. You know, a lot of us are. Of course, there's mainstream metal, and also I don't want to make a generalization because, you know, it's easy to put everybody under the same banner when we're all individuals. But you know, and that's a mistake we all make too often. I think in life we tend to make that, so I'm careful with that. But a lot of metal fans, especially in the underground scene, kind of where I come from, you know, extreme metal, like death metal, thrash metal, black metal, grindcore, all that stuff, all the subgenres, you know, all the stuff that I grew up thinking is like the coolest thing in the world. You know, those people are kind of like not the cool kids in school necessarily. You know, we're more like kind of the weird kids, the punk kids, you know, the outcasts, the kids that like to do things a little bit differently. And I think with that, you know, understanding some of these types of music that are very odd and extreme to most people, even today, comes a sort of like, you know, an open-mindedness, I think, to allow that stuff in and to allow that stuff to sink in. I don't know how it was for you, but I remember the first time I heard some of these bands that are now just, you know, part of my life, you know, like Napalm Death or Obituary, or, you know, I didn't understand it really at first. I was like, whoa, like this is what's happening, you know. But I gave it more chances until it became like, yeah, this is the best ever. And so I think, you know, a lot of people don't make that effort. They hear it the first time and they're like, oh, this is a bunch of noise, like turn it off, you know. And so I think with us metalheads, it tends more to be a thing of like, oh, what is this? I'm intrigued by it. I don't really get it. I don't really understand what's going on, but something is drawing me to it. You know, that's how it was for me. So I'm going to listen to it again. And eventually you start understanding it and it starts making sense. And I feel like still a lot of my favorite albums, even today, are the ones that initially I'm like, I don't know about this. And then, you know, you keep trying and it's like, you know, it unveils itself like after a number of listens. You're like, this is what it is. Okay, now I'm understanding, you know. It's not everything is like that, but there is that side. And maybe that's part of it, you know, this willingness to dig a little bit deeper, to maybe go the unconventional route. And you know, a lot of people are trying to tell us like, oh, climate change is bullshit and, you know, eat your meat, you know, like people are, you know, they're trying to make it look like us vegans are trying to shut everything down or whatever. And it's kind of funny to me because you can just see them shaking in their boots, you know. It's like, it's like, look, I don't care if people are vegan or not massively. Like, again, I think everybody should do what they want. But the truth is that, you know, the way we're going now, like there's more and more signs that prove that it's just not really sustainable. So, you know, you can put your head in the sand and just continue the traditions and pretend that nothing is wrong, and then that's fine too, you know. But I don't think that's the way I want to go. That's all.
I think what was interesting about what you said then was how the thing that I thought was that I particularly noticed was how you were saying about how sort of maybe metalheads, again, don't want to generalize, but from my experience, maybe they're just open to that second listen, you know, that just, oh, what was that, rather than immediately going, no, I don't like it. It doesn't mean they'll like it on the second listen, but perhaps there's just more openness to actually listening the second or the third time, you know, because I think there is a tendency to go, oh, I don't like, like, you know, I don't understand that, so I don't like it, you know. So yeah, maybe that's a good kind of, I can see what you're saying, rather than just being, it's not just about being more open, it's actually about just maybe even just being open to like listening one more time to the point. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
I think it also, you know, I think a lot of us are drawn to like a certain non-conformist aspect that comes with, you know, anything from punk to all the other, you know, subgenres and extreme genres of music. You know, there's a certain side where it's like, we don't want to belong to the mainstream thing. You know, I had that even before I was into metal, and you know, actually yesterday my wife and I went to see the Beastie Boys exhibit here, and it was great. And Beastie Boys was like a band that transformed my life, you know, when I was really young. And, you know, I was only 12 years old when I got their first album. And, you know, of course that was a big hit, and it was mainstream because of a couple of songs and videos that made it, you know, onto TV, and they made a lot of, you know, noise with their antics and stuff. But at the same time, it was also like this birth of a whole new genre of music, you know, with bands like Run DMC and Public Enemy and all the original, you know, the old school rap artists and stuff, like Cool J, Ice-T, you name it, you know, and all that stuff to me was like way more, you know, I listened to a lot of radio and classical music and pop music growing up, and nothing against that, but it was like, wow, here's something that's, you know, cool, because a lot of people aren't really going to get this, you know, like the normal kids in my school are going to be like, yeah, you're weird, you know, and I was kind of drawn to that, you know, I kind of didn't want to be like that, and I wanted to be different. And so I think there's a little bit of that too, you know, a desire to kind of build your own universe that you can then share with like-minded people and kind of thrive in that, and be like, yeah, you'll never understand this, you know?
Yeah, but what I found interesting when I was listening to your interview with Kiko, I say it was like an interview as if you haven't met before, you know, but like,
yeah,
he was saying about how you seem to be quite an upbeat kind of person, and I can get that from having spoken to you for all of half an hour, but what I was intrigued to sort of delve into was obviously a lot of people, and we've kind of touched on it already, a lot of people turn to like heavier music quite often, sadly, as a sort of a like not a coping mechanism, but like you said, a little universe that they can call their own, that is maybe their escape from just day to day, I guess, things that they don't like. And I wanted to ask kind of if you relate to that at all, but also if not, like if you feel that you're maybe coming to metal and heavier music from, I guess, like a happier kind of standpoint. What is it that draws you to the heavier music, if not the kind of the catharsis and the I guess the emotional sort of escapism? What is it that draws you to that kind of music?
Yeah, you know, I've tried to answer that question for myself. I think definitely, you know, as much as I'm an upbeat person, and I definitely had a happy upbringing and was always comfortable, you know, I also struggled, you know, especially as a young teenager and into my early 20s, you know, I struggled because I was very socially anxious, and I just didn't really know how to communicate with groups of people. Like I could communicate well with one or two friends, you know, and kind of have a thing going. But as soon as there were like, it was a party or I was at school or it was a group of people, I was just too shy and too introverted to really know how to handle that. And so I would kind of freeze up and just be pretty useless in those situations, you know. And so I do think for me, you know, this kind of music that had like a controversial side to it and a dark side to it and a, you know, aggressive side to it was an outlet for me, for sure. It was an outlet for me to kind of process those emotions that I couldn't really process in a proper way. And so, you know, having moved from Belgium to France at age 13, I think it was 12 or 13, I moved to France because my dad started working there. So our family moved there. And it was just kind of a big shock for me because I hardly spoke French. You know, I mean, when you're in Belgium, you learn a little bit of French, but it wasn't like I could have a conversation. And then, you know, all my friends, my family, all the people I was used to seeing on a daily or regular basis were all of a sudden like, you know, 450 kilometers away, you know. And so, of course, we would visit and all that frequently, but it was still all of a sudden I'm in a in a completely different environment now. I remember being really angry at my parents for a while for just doing that to me, you know, because I felt like they did it to me. Obviously, they were just trying to go ahead with life. And in hindsight, I'm thankful because I think it was a great learning thing for me. But at the time, it was definitely music was a way to help cope with that, as was skateboarding. You know, I was just trying to be, you know, part of something because I couldn't be. I felt part of the, you know, the normal, the mainstream thing that was happening where people that didn't necessarily have so many social anxieties and stuff. Of course, all teenagers have issues. You know, we all know about teenage angst, but you know, some people are just comfortable like being in class, you know, and being with all these. You know, I was in international schools, so those people from all across the globe, and others. For me, it was much harder. I did find friends, but again, I was way more comfortable in a smaller setting. You know, since I also didn't have any siblings growing up, I think it was just kind of what I was used to. You know, having my own bubble. And so that was really challenged by this move. And that's when music came in. And that's when I think, you know, I had anger in me. I had like frustration in me, probably a bunch of other negative feelings. And I learned to transfer that into music that also expresses those things. And yeah, it's a very interesting point you bring up because as metalheads or as, you know, any sort of, you know, extreme underground music enthusiast, we can listen to stuff that sounds really dark and that makes us happy. You know, it's like, and then I can listen to like Coldplay and it makes me depressed. You know, it's like, I turn it off. Like, I don't want to hear it, you know, not because it's bad. It's just like, that's not the vibe I want to get. You know, I want to get a vibe of power and aggression and just that kind of stuff, you know, and so, yeah. And same with the, in middle school hip hop, there's a lot of energy in that too. You know? So that's just kind of how it came together for me, I think.
It's interesting because obviously you, through moving to France and you're saying not being able to sort of speak the language like fluently and in conversation, I guess then naturally you can, the best form of communication you have is, you know, it's through music and a sort of form of connection, you know, that you're connecting with the music in some way. Maybe I'm making a stretch sort of somehow here, but it seems like that's some way of finding that connection maybe where it's hard to do so when language kind of gets in the way. I mean, in terms of languages, do you feel like picking up languages has kind of helped your musical sort of mindset? Because I know I'm aware you kind of you play several instruments, right? And you're kind of quite creative in terms of the songwriting side. Because I know the drummer stereotype is just turn up, play the drums, go. You know, that's like the stereotype, obviously. Do you think there's a tie maybe between the sort of your language sort of acquisition and learning of new languages and then this ability to create music as well? Because it is in its own way sort of a language. Yeah,
it's a really good point. You know, music is a universal language and it works everywhere. And so to go back to some of the, you know, what you said first is definitely, I think it was a language that at the time kind of substituted my lack of speaking with French people, you know, because it took me some years to become half decent. French is not the easiest language to learn. So now I'm fluent at it. Obviously, I lived there for 18 years, but it was hard. And music kind of was a substitute. And yeah, when it comes to, you know, it's funny because I was always had a creative drive. As soon as I, you know, started playing, like before playing drums, which I started around age 15, I played, you know, violin, electric guitar, piano. I played all kinds of instruments. And, you know, as soon as I had the drums where it was like no lessons, just me jamming to stuff I liked, I always had this creative drive. But for many, many years, there was also sort of, even though I did write some music with people, you know, where I picked up the guitar and came up with riffs and put stuff together, I always had the stigma that like, well, I'm a drummer. And a lot of these guitar players that I play with in these bands are way better than me. They know what they're doing. So I shouldn't really get too involved with, you know, I always felt like they know. I'm not really a guitar player, you know, I focused on drums. I didn't study my guitar. I'm just kind of, you know, lower than them, if you will, on the totem pole. So I'm going to leave that part to them. They know best. And it worked well when, you know, for example, in Scarvis, Soilwork, my two earlier bands, you know, before I was in Megadeth, it worked well. We had good understanding, things worked well, but there was always a part of me that wanted to do my own thing. And it wasn't until I started my own band, Band C, in 2011, which was at the encouragement of my wife, who felt this for me. And she said, you just have to do your own stuff. It wasn't until then that I, kind of embraced this part of me where I am able to create. And I try to pass this on to my students nowadays, because the truth is everybody can create. You don't need to be necessarily educated in the instrument you play. You don't need to be great at it. There's no requirements for art. There really isn't. At the end of the day, like, people will judge if they like it or not, and that's a different story. But the creation, the creativity, which is such a fulfilling aspect of being a human, like, just being able to make something out of nothing, whether it's a piece of poetry or a piece of music or a painting or a book, whatever it is, photographs, like my wife's a photographer, anything that fulfills you is just, it's a wonderful thing. And so it's about overcoming, I think, your own fears and your own doubts and your own reservations as to, like, yeah, but can I do that? No, I'm not good enough. Like, we could all compare ourselves to, I don't know, Mozart or Beethoven and be like, yeah, why are we doing music? Or like, John Coltrane or Miles Davis, and be like, what are we doing here? But, that makes no sense. I mean, I grew up listening to Prince and just loving him and everything he does. And I'm still a huge fan. And he was a guy who just went into the studio and recorded drums, bass, guitar, percussion, vocals, like keyboards, you name it. And in 3 hours he had When Doves Cry, for example. And it's just because he did it, it's just because he didn't let anything stop him. He just went for it. And yeah, of course he was incredible, at what he did, and extremely talented, and knew exactly what he was doing. But that can exist on all different levels. You don't have to be Prince to be able to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you can just do that and learn as you go. And so I embraced that starting in 2011. I really fully embraced that. And I tried to spread that message of, like, just embrace your creativity. And at the end of the day, if what you made, you don't think it's good, then make something better. You don't have to play it for anybody. You don't have to show it to anybody. You can just do it. And then from there, you'll see where it takes you. And it's a path, it's kind of like it goes on forever.
Speaking of creativity, when I was in the studio with my old band, we actually referenced there's a little snare roll in Distance, like the accelerating, the kind of accelerating. We actually referenced. I'm trying to remember what it was now. The producer's like, we need this fill that, like, ramps up. And he went like something like this and played. So there's I suppose there's sort of a small world moment there. I just remember that, actually. So quite a cool little connection. Yeah. In terms of, again, something I picked up from, I totally resonate with that, because I know I sometimes sit down and think, I need to learn this before I write a song, or I need to learn this, or, and then I find if I actually just sit and try and write something, if I just pick up one of these many guitars behind me and just try and write something, it, like, 9 times out of 10, if I sit for more than an hour, something half decent happens. It's not always great, but, like, something half decent happens. And I think sometimes you just got to do it. Like, I was, the last guest was Eyal Levy, and he was saying about, you just got to do it. Like, the way to do the thing is to do the thing, just to start rather than.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, Joe. I think it's people speak about inspiration, and people always ask you, like, I see this a lot with Dave Mustaine too. How do you write songs? Like, the lyrics or the music come first and stuff. And the truth is, and most people will tell you this, there's no rules. Like you said, just do it. Just, if you want to create something, or if an idea, sometimes it's an idea runs through your head, or you'll hear a beat, or you'll hear a guitar riff, whatever. Just go and record it, And a lot of times, what I try to do with Ben C is I try to just improvise stuff. Because I always start with drums, since I'm still, like, that's still my main instrument. I was like, why don't I do the unconventional thing and just record a bunch of drums? And so whenever I get the chance, to be in the studio with one of my producer friends, or, have just the energy, sometimes I'll do it here at home on the E-Kit. I just sit down and record a bunch of crap, and And then at some point later, sometimes years later, I'll start sifting through that and be like, oh, this is cool. This is cool. This can be a song, and then I build off of that. And then I do the same with guitar, where I'll just sit down and be like, all right, pick up the guitar, put on this drum track you selected last week, see if you can come up with some riffs. And then you see where it takes you, And again, it's really about just kicking your own ass and being like, yeah, like you said, sit down, and a lot of times within a little bit of time, you'll come up with something that you didn't even knew you had in you. And then a lot of times you can work a little bit on that, and it will turn out to be maybe a pretty cool thing. Sometimes not. Sometimes listen back the next day or 2 days later, you're like, oh, that's kind of shit. You put it aside or you change it, whatever. But that's part of the creative process. It's an exploration. And I think embracing that exploration and just not putting any boundaries on yourself and not putting any outside pressure on yourself, I think that's a lot of those big artists like Prince and Michael Jackson and all the modern day guys that came kind of before in more or less the rock pop genre, the music that we all come from, the rock and roll and blues. I think that's what they all did. They just let go of their boundaries, and that's like becomes a personal growth thing. To kind of reconnect back to the chat with Kiko. A lot of that is about embracing who we are and realizing that, look, our time on Earth is pretty short. In the best case scenario, if we're lucky to grow old and healthy, it's still pretty damn short. It still flies by. That's how my life feels, at least. So most people I speak to feel the same. So it's about, if you have that in you, make the most of it. Don't squander that, because it's a gift. Not everybody necessarily has that or has that desire or that drive or is drawn to that kind of stuff. But when you do, as I know, I knew from a very young age. I was making what I call mega mixes using my dad's double tape deck, just taking bits and pieces of like various songs and pasting them together to try and make like phrases with like hip hop stuff or, just silly stuff where it's like, wow, I was already creative when I was 10, not knowing what I was doing or why I was doing it. With that childlike innocence, you're just kind of like, you just do it, you don't question why or if you're going to do something with it or if it matters. Like, you just know, you just feel it, so you do it. And that's kind of what I go back to.
Yeah, the thing that really struck me when you were talking with Kiko is about how you were talking about always trying to learn, always kind of learning and developing something new, and sort of I guess my question is, what in recent years, is there anything that you feel like you've learned about life or about yourself that over the last couple of years that maybe that's changed the way you think about life, music, relationships, family, whatever?
Yes, definitely. I think in recent years, my biggest focus has been on, it's kind of personal about my marriage and my relationship, because, I grew up in a pretty open-minded setting, but at the same time, I started realizing that open-mindedness is a very tricky thing, because you can be very open-minded in general, but still have a lot of, when it comes to small things, preconceived notions of how things seem to have to be in your mind, and then when they aren't that way, or when it doesn't turn out that way, or when you don't get the reaction you expect, or whatever, it could be anything, then you're like, kind of like, don't know what to do with that. And then like sometimes feelings of anger or frustration, or, those things that I mentioned earlier can come up. And then you're kind of sat there like, why am I feeling this, So I've learned, like in the past years, I'm in the process of learning this. It's an ongoing thing, but to take a few steps back when these things happen and really ask myself, like, why am I having this reaction? Am I really being open-minded to the situation now? Am I really growing, or am I just stuck in like, I said this and I thought that would be the response, and I got the opposite response, and now I'm frustrated because I don't like this response, And I think that's, and I think about that in the bigger picture of like humanity and, life, whatever. I think some of the problems that we face as a species come from the fact that people tend to have habits and things that they just see a certain way through seeing them that way for a long time, or seeing them that way around them, or being taught that they are that way. Again, like the meat thing is a good example, but there's many examples across the board on personal level, on all kinds of levels, political, religious, you name it. So, and then there's all these echo chambers nowadays that want to keep us there and feed that to us so that we believe it even more, So I'm very wary of that stuff. I'm very open to like getting information from all kinds of angles. But I think ultimately we really have to make decisions for ourselves. And in a very small setting, such as a relationship, true open-mindedness is something that I still am working on and aspire to, because I think truly being a good partner for somebody is being there for them. Like the definition is when you get married and stuff through thick and thin, through good and bad. It really means that when shit doesn't go your way, in the worst case scenario, the example that you say when you get married is maybe you picture this person getting really sick or something, and now all of a sudden, your situation changes. But it can also be very stupid, mundane, daily shit. It doesn't have to be this big life event. It can be a little daily thing where something isn't going the way you anticipated it would, and now what do you do with that? Do you, does that frustrate you? Does that make you angry? Is that a problem? Or on the contrary, do you go, okay, all right, well, explain, like, why do you feel that way, or elaborate on that, and let's come to let's come to something here with that, let's come to an agreement or a conclusion or an understanding. And so always keeping this open-mindedness of like this other person that I know, more or less. In the case of my wife, I've known her, we've been married for quite a few years. I don't always know what she's thinking, or I don't always understand why she feels the way she feels. And I think embracing that is what I've been working on, rather than sometimes, I wouldn't say fighting that, but having kind of not really a path forward with some of those things.
I feel like, I can definitely resonate with that kind of, sometimes I find if someone does something that I don't understand, or that I don't like, it's very hard sometimes. I think sometimes the best thing to do, but the hardest thing to do, is to empathize with them and then to understand why they're acting like that. And I find often when I'm reluctant to be empathetic, it's when I'm sat there feeling like I deserve something to happen. Like, oh, I don't deserve this to happen to me. And I feel like it's very hard to get out of that mindset of what I do and what I don't deserve in life. I think one of the, I feel like the things that the big drivers of any unhappiness in my life have been feeling like I deserve something, and not really acknowledging why, or, and I think I probably know quite a lot of people like that as well, where you feel like you deserve something out of a situation, so you never think to empathize with the person who's done whatever it is that's annoyed you. Have you become more like empathetic through just over the course of your life? Do you feel like that's something that you've sort of grown with as a person?
I hope so. That's definitely one of my biggest goals, because I think empathy is one of the ultimate positive things you can have as a human and you can express. And I think you expressed it really well, Joe. You said exactly in the way that I also see it, where we do feel deserving a lot of times. I think a lot of the debate on, the patriarchy and like white men, is like a lot of that is about feeling like we deserve certain things from women, from, people of color, etc. Throughout the years, there's been a lot of that setup happening, and how privileged we've become through that, and how we're kind of like, us white men are kind of like at the top of the, we're the least at risk for pretty much everything, which is kind of messed up, when you think about it. And a lot of that comes from this feeling of, I think, deserving stuff. And then some people will really push that, they really push like what they deserve to become their reality, and in some cases that's not necessarily a thing that hurts others, but in a lot of cases it does hurt others, and it does disregard others. And it's a very difficult debate to have when you're a white male. But I think to get back to, empathy, I think that's really the best thing we can have. I've learned to listen, shut up and listen, because I don't always have the words or the answers or the solution or the whatever it is. Sometimes the best place I can have is just shut up and listen and be empathetic and try to understand and take what you heard with you and think about it and let that, kind of guide you in the next steps. I think having that ability to step back is very important.
I think kind of jumping right back to when we talked about sort of activism for, well, it doesn't really matter what the cause is, but I know something that's been very contentious over here in the UK is the Extinction Rebellion kind of thing. And I won't ask you to get all political and everything on the podcast, but I know there's been lots of shouting on both sides where, for example, someone from Extinction Rebellion will, for example, like glue themselves to a motorway or something, and then cause traffic jams for the day, and then you get so you get people on one side, I feel, sort of shouting in one way, because fair enough, if you feel like the planet's being totally destroyed, of course you want to shout about it, but then equally you get people who aren't willing to listen at all, and I feel like there's no middle ground there where, because I don't know what the balance is, because how do you talk about these? You need to raise awareness for whatever cause it is, really. If you want to raise awareness, and you feel like you've run out of options, what do you do? Like, do you just make a blog about it? Like, that's, how far is that going to go? But then, are you shutting yourself off from the conversation by doing things that, it sounds bad to say annoy other people, but disrupt day-to-day life, because there were ambulances being stopped in traffic, for example, and then a lot of that kind of then ends up demonizing the whole other sort of argue, you know what I mean? Because people then just immediately associate climate activists with people that get in the way of ambulances, and it becomes this whole, I don't know the answer. I'm just thinking, I think I agree with you in that it lies somewhere to do with empathy and something to do with trying to understand rather than just getting annoyed at the other person, trying to understand them.
I agree with you. I think, there's always a danger with extreme action. I also totally understand where it comes from. It is, again, this feeling of being powerless, facing the situation that's going to push certain types of people and certain people that are really entrenched in these things, to go and themselves to a motorway or whatever. Start Greenpeace used to do a lot of stuff like that back in the day, trying to stop boats and whaling boats and whatnot. And Sea Shepherd still does that to some degree. But when violence and like harm to other people, like, with the ambulances and stuff gets involved, it does become very difficult to still make your point, to get seen, especially for those who are already not necessarily on your side, they're going to use that to demonize you. And so I do think there's always going to be those things, and that's kind of human nature, and it's kind of maybe has to be part of the debates, because that stuff is in the news and we talk about it and we hear about it. And then it gets most of us who are, I believe always that most people are kind of more moderate in some way. You always have the extremists, and then you have, in the middle there's all the moderate people, which tends to be, the biggest portion, I believe. I don't know if I'm right about that, but one would hope so. It gets those people to maybe talk and think, and that's where I think the responsibility of people like myself comes in, where it's like, look, I have a little platform. I don't have a huge platform, but I have enough followers on social media where if I say something, there's going to be some people learning and reacting and seeing it and maybe sharing it and maybe donating some money or maybe spreading the message, whatever. So a big example for me for that is Barney from Napalm Death. They were one of my favorite bands from the UK growing up, hugely influential for me. They always were, a band with a social message from the early days, even before Barney was in the band. But he's always had, his heart on his sleeve during, of course, in his lyrics and everything he talks about in interviews, but also on stage. He always makes a point. I've seen Napalm countless times. Always makes a point of saying things that he thinks are important, about how we treat each other as people in the world and all that stuff. And I think that's where an artist can still, even today, when the musical climate and the musical business has really changed, an artist can still play a very important role. And so if you have that in you, like I do as well. I mean, I'm no Barney maybe, but I want to do it in my way. I feel that's my responsibility. I feel that's my duty, as a citizen. And again, to be in line with what I believe, it would be wrong of me not to do that. It would be, I would have issues with myself being like, yeah, here I am, saying that, like Earth is going to shit, but in the meantime, I'm sitting back just watching Netflix all day, like, I mean, you can't be perfect. Like, you can't be 100% vegan if you try, unless if you maybe go live in the forest somewhere, you can't, it's not about being perfect. I often tell people this too, when they ask me about, like, to go back to veganism for a second, like, how do you do it and stuff? And I'm like, look, you could be vegan one day a week or one day a month if you want, and that would make a huge impact. And everybody's always like, without fault, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, because the only way it's ever presented to you is like, either you're this hardcore vegan who's like, chaining himself to trees and, protesting at slaughterhouses, or you're the opposite, you're the guy who eats meat all day. And it's like, there's all these, gray areas in between that you're free to choose from. And you can do whatever you're comfortable with. You can just try something one day and see if you like an Impossible Burger or a Beyond Burger or whatever, and maybe you don't, and that's fine. Just give it a shot, give it some, have an open mind towards it, have an approach to it if you do care a little bit about the planet. And so that's, I feel, the responsibility. That's where I feel like it's really important for us to realize that, like, hey, there's many different ways you can try and get people's attention. And the good thing we have as artists is that people look up to us. They look to us for inspiration. They look to us for, of course, entertainment and for feeling good and taking them away from their own, issues that they might have in their life. But at the same time, we can also, deliver a positive message. And people are drawn to that. I don't want to be like too pushy about it or, make everything about that, because that's also not my goal. I don't want to be that annoying guy that like, every time Dirk turns up, it's like, that's all he talks about. No, like, I love music, and it's, I love blast beats and I love, heavy songs and whatnot. So it's like, that's a big part of what I do, I love playing drums and I love being in bands, but at the same time, if I'm going to say something, I'm going to say something that I believe in, and I'm going to say something that I hope will inspire some other people to, find their own path. Don't do what I do, or don't feel obliged to anything. Just think, think for yourself. And that's, to get back to Barney, he says that, think for yourself. When they do their Nazi Punks Fuck Off cover, which has, the famous ending line, like, if you could only think, that's like, that's it. That sums it up right there.
Yeah, I like the kind of what you're talking about. We're just saying something I really resonate with is this idea that when you feel like you try and do something new, in your example of, say, veganism, for example, but it could be anything in life. I find sometimes if I fail at one thing in the day, it's really easy to like give up on all the other things in the day. Because you go, oh well, I forgot. Say I get up late. If I wake up later in the morning or even in the afternoon or whatever, and then I'm like, oh well, I've woken up late, so I'm going to have a rubbish day. And actually, I think the mindset of like, okay, I messed up one thing, but I can still have a positive impact on all the other things in my day today. I think that's something I've been trying to think about. But I mean, to sort of finish up on a sort of positive kind of note. Going back to what you're saying about Kiko, particularly, I sort of picked up on him saying that you seem to be quite an upbeat person. I guess, have you sort of, in those times, in the things that kind of make you happy in life, have you picked up on maybe what it is about you personally that, the things in life that particularly make you happy? Have you sort of come to realize what they are?
I mean, there are some really obvious ones, like, my family, my animals. I have 3 dogs and a cat currently. I love them to death. I spend a lot of time with them when I'm home and not into it. But really, Joe, what I want to tell you, and this is also something that I feel, I kind of touched upon that in the chat with Kiko as well. This is a really important thing that I'm learning, that I'm in the process of learning, is that, like, look, you can look at everything from a completely dark angle, from a completely light angle, like everything, every single thing. Like you said, the example you said, this totally resonates with me. I used to be a person that, not that long ago, 10, 15 years ago, if I woke up and I thought I was in a bad mood, my day was rubbish. It was done. But I do that to myself, like that's not the day happening to me. That's me deciding early on that, like, this is crap, right? Like, this is gonna suck. And then, effectively, then you're like, then you drop something in the kitchen when you'll drop your coffee, like beans when you're, grinding up your coffee, fucking hell. And then, like the dog eats somewhere he's not allowed to. And then you start seeing all the bad stuff and then your day is effectively rubbish, Or, the other way to do it, which I'm in the process of learning and which I feel I'm getting better and better at, is, if you kind of lower your expectations to begin with. to not have too many plans, too many expectations that you're not going to live up to, because we tend to plan way too many things in our days, too much work, more than we can do, and then all that stuff, all the frustration that comes up. I didn't get to this, I didn't finish that. If we lower that, and we also really consciously start being aware of how grateful we really should be to be happy and healthy and alive. We all have our problems. Like, I have my problems, you have yours, I'm sure. Everybody does, and people will argue that, yeah, the poor people have way worse problems than us people that are, comfortable. Of course they do, and I'm the last person to argue with that. But still, the problems we encounter in our daily lives are still issues for us as well, and we have to deal with those. And so I really have learned to have this standpoint of like looking at the positive side of things. Oh, the dog poops need to be picked up in the yard. Cool. That's a moment for me to go with my dogs and get a little bit of, the weather, whatever, sunshine in, some weather, and hang out with the dogs a little bit, instead of being, fuck, I have to go pick up the dog poops, like, it's dumb stuff like that, but it really like changes everything. It's crazy, like the power of the mind, it is unbelievable. Like, if you make that a habit, it doesn't happen overnight, it takes some work. At least for me, it does, but if you start thinking like that and start being like, what, every day that I wake up and that I'm healthy and I'm not having some kind of issue that requires me to go to the hospital and get taken care of, or somebody I know is like really struggling, whatever, you have a nice day, you're freaking lucky to be walking around, you could not be here. I mean, Hannah and I, had our friend Sean, Sean Reiner, in 2020, he just suddenly out of nowhere passed away. He used to be, the drummer in Cynic and Death. I'm sure you've heard of him. He was a very influential drummer to me growing up, and many years later, just being here kind of by chance, we met and became friends. And him and his husband, me and my wife, and all of a sudden, he just basically just out of nowhere was totally fine. I just had his yearly annual done, and then all of a sudden, boom, like he's gone, like just something ruptured, and that's it. Life is over, done, and that kind of stuff really makes you think about how fragile it is and how we don't think about this stuff. We're kind of jaded. We kind of think like, yeah, of course I'm going to wake up tomorrow. Like, I put my alarm, The truth is, you might not wake up tomorrow. And it's a very kind of dark, fatalistic thing, looking at stuff when you think about it that way. So I'm not saying, think all the time you're going to die, because that's not very positive. It's more just having that awareness in the back of your head that like, look, we should be pretty freaking grateful, So make the most of what you have. Make the most of your day. Try to enjoy what you have to do. If you have to do a bunch of work, enjoy your work. If you really hate your work to the point where you just can't enjoy it, maybe it's time to switch careers. Maybe it's trying to find something else to do. Let that be your motivation, For me, I'm lucky I managed to get to a place where, over many years of hard work, to do a job I really enjoy. And so, that's makes it a bit easier for me to be like, oh, I have to go record drums today. Great. I love playing drums, so it's not that hard. But it can still become a drag, and this is what you do, when you're on a 2-month tour, and you've been out for 7 or 8 weeks and you're playing your 40th or 50th show, and, you're tired, and like you want to see your family and all this, like all these things can become difficult at times mentally. And that's when you have to really just kind of check yourself, and be like, look, I'm going to make the choice to enjoy this and to not let this get to me. Do I always succeed? No, I have crappy days like everybody, but I've really minimized them. I think I talked about this a little bit with Kiko too. I've really minimized them to the point where, it's not this major drag in my general outlook. When you say, oh, I'm I seem like I'm a happy guy. Like, that's a choice. That's a choice I make. I have that in me, but I choose to let that be, the way I live life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think there's I totally resonate with that kind of. It's not always easy, like you say, but it's I think it's about building that and not having that expectation that you can do that overnight. Like you said, it's something that you can work towards, and I think that's something when you expect that to happen overnight, it's like maybe just look for the 1%, improvement. That's the thing to look for, maybe. But yeah,
Definitely.
that's awesome, man. I had one kind of fun question just to finish up that I thought that you might like. I recently chatted to Darby Todd, who I don't know if you know, so he currently plays for Devin Townsend,
Uh-huh.
and I'm aware you played for him for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, I did an album and some shows with him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought it'd be quite a fun question. If who would you like to see as a drummer with Devin at some point in another parallel universe? Who do you think would make a good drummer, a good sort? I don't want to say replacement because I feel really bad because I chatted to Darby not long ago. He's great. I'm just saying, in a hypothetical other world, what drummer would you love to see put their mark on his music?
Man, that's a great question. I would really like to see him play with like a full-on jazz drummer. You know, like I don't really know many like current jazz drummers. He's already played with Morgan Ogren, who's a jazz drummer among others. I mean, Morgan can play pretty much anything, but he's a very improvisational, like feel-based drummer. And Devin's of course already played with him. He's obviously played with people like Gene Hoglan and Ryan Van Poodroy and all these amazing drummers over the years. But I think I could see Devin Devin is such a incredible creative spirit and such a he explores so much of music just within this one person. It's just mind-blowing. Some of the stuff I witnessed like working with him was just life-changing. I think he's like, to me, he's like Prince, but metal version or current version, whatever you want to call it, because he doesn't only make metal music. But I think it would be really cool to see Devin like do a Devin version of jazz, and just play with a guy who's like super versed in that kind of stuff and can just go along with him in the moment. That would be super interesting.
I'm so averse to jazz that the idea of Devin, I'd be like, no, just keep Devin doing Devin stuff. I don't want to hear jazz Devin. I like him how he is. But yeah, that's awesome, man. Thanks so much for your.
It would still be Devin, it would still be his thing. It wouldn't be necessarily like jazz, maybe the kind of jazz you're averse to, but it would more be like, just because jazz to me is like completely embracing improvisation in a way where it turns out amazing,
Yeah. Well, maybe he can make the most of it. I don't know. I'm sure he'd do a better job than I would have. Of that. Anyway, but yeah, thank you, man. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. And so if we could get a question for the next guest, who is tomorrow. I won't tell you who, so you can keep it nice and open. And then also an artist that you think deserves some love.
Nice. Excellent. All right. So I want to ask this unknown artist, I want to ask them, what do you do to make your day a good day?
Nice. Yeah.
What do you choose, or let's put it like this. What do you choose to do to make your day a good day?
Nice. It's a good start on a positive note. Maybe I'll just say loads of awful things. Oh, great.
Exactly.
Yeah, shout at the neighbours, like steal something.
Yeah. Play some Slayer at like volume 11 through the windows. And,
that's a good thing. Yeah. And then, so yeah, if you also got an artist you'd like to plug to the world.
An artist I'd like to plug to the world, man. Recently, I've been listening to so much like stuff from the past. I'm kind of struggling to come up with something current, even though I really do follow, a lot of the current metal scene. One of the bands that I really think is pushing the envelope, that's a great band, is a band called Autark from Holland. They used to be called Dodecahedron. They did a couple albums under that banner, playing kind of really progressive style of black metal with lots of amazing, just musicality and inventiveness. And they've, since that band has disbanded, but two of the guys have made this new project called Autark, which is a very, they're kind of blending elements of electronic music with metal with a very open-minded approach, kind of a multifaceted approach like people like Devin or bands like Mr. Bungle have done over the years, where they really touch on very different things, but somehow make it fit. Bands like Older, Older is another great example of a band that has just, touched on so many different things. And I find that fascinating. I find it very, for a band like Autark to just kind of come on and make a record that's already unconventional. And then the next thing they do is make like an ambient version of that record. That to me speaks of like a braveness and just really embracing what they feel rather than some kind of business plan or like, well, like what most of us feel is like, for example, with Betsy, I tried to have this open-mindedness, but there's still part of me that's like, well, it started out as a grindcore band, so I can't really like, deviate too far from that, or people who are into grindcore are going to be like, what the fuck are you doing? But there's a willingness of me, or part of me that wants to just shatter that and be like, hey, my next album is a jazz album, or whatever. So I really, they're a great band. Just check them out.
Nice. Is there anything you want to sort of plug or promote for yourself?
Well, I mean, I'll talk a little bit about what we have coming up with Megadeth. We're going to be back in Europe. We're actually playing Bloodstock in August. So I'm really looking forward to that. We played there some years ago. It was an amazing show, amazing night, so looking forward to being back there. And obviously our new album is out, came out, played last year, The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. So check that out if you haven't. And, we have lots of cool stuff coming up. Also with Betsy, which I mentioned a few times, which is my own band, my project I do on the side. I have an album that's probably going to come out in the next months or sometime this year. It's been in the works for many, many years. So check that out. If you're into extreme, crazy shit, you'll love it.
That's another small world moment, actually. I taught, or sort of transcribed and taught the opening riff to the title track from your new album to a guitar student of mine, which was quite fun. Quite enjoyed figuring that out and struggling through it, but got there in the end, I think.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
Very
anyway,
cool.
Thank you so much, man. That was I really enjoyed chatting. It was really great.
Likewise, Joe. Thanks for having me on, man. Thanks for the interesting and unusual conversation. It was really a lot of fun. So usually it's a lot about, like you said, the band, the album, the tour, whatever. This was a lot of fun, so I really enjoyed it.